Because of my arrest, I was basically unlendable. Like, no bank is going to lend to me. They don't know me. I don't have a track record, right? Properties that you had were lost, you know? And it forced me to either give up on my dream of being a developer, being, in real estate, or instead of coming up with 25% down, I was going to just have to save, make more money, save, and buy the properties cash. If you're out there, you're listening, the most important thing that you have to be able to do to be successful is save money. So people don't realize you need money to make money. Let's go.
Teo Scorte, one of my personal great friend, but also one of my inspirations. You're my real estate. I always say you're my real estate and my entrepreneur role model. So thank you so much for carving out the time.
Great being here, buddy.
You're one of the few people, I get a lot of calls and texts, and when we hang out, you're one of the few people who always outdo me. When we finish and we both look at our phones, you always have more missed calls, more voicemails, more texts. I don't know how you do it.
Listen, it's the grind. It's the grind. It's 24/7.
Well, listen, let's start with that, Teo. How do you see time? And I really appreciate it's a beautiful February day. It's in the high 60s, the sun's out. You have so much going on, personal life, professionally. How do you manage time?
I think it's how do you approach it. And, early on in life, I feel like I was an old soul. I always wanted to be successful, but I felt very shortchanged, so I'm 5'4", right? You play sports, you're at a disadvantage. You try to get the girls, you're at a disadvantage. We moved to the States when I was in the third grade and speak the English. And so because I was an old soul, I feel like I was very cognizant of all my shortcomings. And, I look back and I can't say I'm great at any one thing. Like I know people that are smarter than me. I know people that are more educated than me. I know people that are more credentialed than me. I know people that are better salespeople than me. I know people that have better discipline. I see some of your runs and I'm like, oh, how does he do it? And so I know people that are more disciplined than me. I know people that are bigger risk takers than me. I know people that are greater visionaries than me. There isn't any one thing that if you put me in a room, I feel like, I'm greater than these guys, except for one thing, and that's the grind. Doesn't matter who you put me in a room with. I have the confidence that I can outwork anybody, and so when I played sports, if some guys were in the gym for 2 hours, I'd be in there for 2, for 4, for 6, like the Kobe mentality, because I couldn't, I didn't have as long of a stride, but if I ran faster for longer, I could do it. So my time on a day-to-day basis is a grind. How many things can I do before I meet with Lawrence at 10 o'clock? How many phone calls can I get in? How many balls can I throw in somebody else's court? And so that's my superpower. I'll grind you. So you should be happy. I didn't take jiu-jitsu.
Well, that's so interesting. I remember when I was probably older teenager, so very impressionable age, something like 18, 19, and I went with a college buddy and we watched a James Bond movie. And he actually said something similar. He said, the thing that makes James Bond great, the character, is that he might not be the best at anything, but he can be in a tuxedo and be very charming. He can also be fighting a guy with a knife, physical combat and overcome. He can also be very charming with a woman. He's got a lot of great skills that together make him James Bond. But if you isolate any skill, he's probably, you can find someone better. And I think that's such a I never thought about it. You just reminded me of that, but it's so true. There's a famous guy, I'm blanking on his name, but he calls it the talent stack. He said it's not about having 1 or 2 talents. It's about having 4 or 5, and you stack them on top of each other, and the sum of the parts is worth more than the individual.
Yeah, there's a quote that I heard for years, and it recently came up on one of my feeds, what the actual quote was. And so I'm, in our industry in construction, if you want to say something negative about someone, you say, oh, he's a jack of all trades. He's not great. He's involved in everything. And then recently I found out the entire quote is a jack of all trades, master of none is always better than a master of one.
Wow.
And I was just amazing. Because I always felt like that. I always felt like I'm a jack of all trades. I'm a master of none, And for so long, like I'm getting goosebumps, I took that as such a derogatory thing because I was like, God, why can't you make me great at something, you know? And, and as I get older, like that's what I want. I want a jack of all trades and a master of none because I feel like life is so complex and there's so much fusion going on and things are so intertwined that when you understand more things at I would say it's a relatively high level, you can make better decisions than if you're just an expert in one area, especially in real estate, in the industry that I'm in.
That's so true. What if you were talking to a 22-year-old now, say a young man, he's, maybe he's graduated, maybe never went to college, and he was kind of lost, and he came to you and he said, Teo, can you give me some advice? What kind of things would you give him?
So I do spend a good amount of time, especially like in our church community. There's a ton of young guys. We got a young church that we're a part of. There's probably like 100 young guys like that. And so I do spend a good amount of time just chit-chatting with younger guys. And I think there's a pandemic for them right now in the information age where people think that like knowing is doing or desiring is accomplishing. And I basically kind of just say, hey, if we're going to meet for a couple sessions within a month, you got to be doing something or I'm not meeting with you anymore. And so I have like this folder in my phone that I keep, like my inspirational quotes. And there's this, like Far Side cartoon. And it says, the difference between an entrepreneur and a wantrepreneur, right? And the only difference is that the entrepreneur a month later has a business. The wantrepreneur just has another idea. And so really, I think the important thing is, okay, you have an idea, like what's the first thing that you need to physically be doing? Like what's the first thing you need to be doing? What's the second thing you need to be doing? As opposed to this drawn out plan that, you're constantly talking about, but you're not actually putting into practice.
I love that. It reminds me of when one of Jen's friends was kind of lost in life, and she was like, I just want to meet a really good guy. And I was thinking, it reminded me of that Jordan Peterson quote. He said in one of his books, he has a whole chapter say, aim lower. So like this woman at the time was a complete mess in her life. She shouldn't be thinking, I want to meet the perfect guy, because she wasn't even ready. If she met him, he probably wouldn't have any interest in her. She had to instead of going to step 100, work on step 2 and step 3 and just, okay, try and get my mindset in a good place, try and get a healthy routine, try to, not walk around and say I'm a mess.
Yeah.
Just these little things and it's action. And I love that. I remember when I was an amateur and I really wanted to turn professional at MMA, and I was like, I just got to be better at all these skills, and I got to spend more time on jiu-jitsu, and I got to spend more time on conditioning. And one of my good friends said, you just got to jump in there. And it's so true. You just got to, jump in there. You can't just wait for the perfect time. You're only getting older. And I think there's so much truth to that idea of grind. And, you're a basketball guy. I'm not. 24 was Kobe's number.
Yeah.
So it is the year of the mother.
It is. My son loves Kobe. So, I got Kobe quotes in the house. So yeah, he's definitely an inspiration. I think that's why even post basketball, he was so successful. Like people don't realize how successful Kobe was in like business and things that he was doing outside of basketball. And so that mindset, which he applied to basketball, didn't leave him. Those lessons, that discipline, the grind. So yeah, we need more Mamba mentality.
Brother, you touched on it. You came here as an immigrant who didn't speak the language. Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I feel like it's so much of your character was forged there. And I feel like that immigrant mentality is almost a superpower. And I almost feel sorry for kids that grow up here and they don't have an appreciation for what America is. They don't have an appreciation for they can publicly do things like burn flags and talk trash about the country they live in and not get shot or arrested like a lot of countries if you did that.
Yeah.
We take these freedoms for granted. But I'd love to talk a little bit about your early days because I feel like it's so informative of your character.
Yeah, that's what I think makes America great. I just recently went back to Romania for the first time in like 25 years. I hadn't been there. My wife was born here. Her parents were Romanian, never went back, took my kids back. And when I came back from Romania, I had it reignited my drive. You get to you get to a certain point where I don't love money, and you get to a certain point where you have the house, you have the car, you have the kids, you have what you kind of need. And it's hard if you don't love money, right? If you're not set on that to be motivated to keep grinding, And so I came back from Romania and I just felt like this fire, to work. And so I'm in this business meeting with these guys in Romania, very well-to-do guys. They own a transportation company. You know, they're killing it. And we're just chit-chatting. They're like, yeah, I got to go to Bucharest really quickly for a meeting. Now, Bucharest is like an 8-hour drive. I mean, he said kind of like, oh, I got to run to Pilsen and meet with Lawrence, you know? And it just took me back where for them, you know, the opportunity was 8 hours away, you know, because the country is so limited. And, you know, for me, it's like if a project is an hour away, I'm like, oh, it's so far. Do I really want to drive an hour? And just kind of like, you know, it just reiterated what makes America great, which is opportunity. You know, and that's why people come to this country. And so I don't think it's a perfect country by any means, but it is the only country people dream of coming to. And if you're not, you know, an immigrant, you don't know like the allure that America has, you know. So I'm thankful that I'm an immigrant, you know.
Well, Teo, I just want to state, so I was very lucky. I taught English in Moscow for one summer in college. I spent a month training in Cuba when I was boxing because they have a really good boxing program. And I spent a few weeks traveling around Venezuela. And when you talk to the people there, and at the, when I was in Russia, I was still living in England. But when I was the other two, I was already here. When you hear people talk about America, like you said, it is that almost mythical place of the dream and the opportunity and the gratitude that they would have to come here. And it's so sad when people don't appreciate, you know, like you said, it's not perfect, no country is, but there's no other country where there's a whole phrase, you know, the American dream. You don't have, you know, the Czechoslovakian dream or the South African dream. You just don't have that phrase. Yeah. It really is. It's so true. So when you came here as a kid, you said that you always felt like you were destined for something.
Yeah. You know, so, you know, my mom and my dad both grew up in rural Romania, you know, and especially my mom, it was just instilled in us that, hey, you're going to do something great in life. It was just instilled in you. And so I think parents have a huge impact in that. And my mom would constantly say something whenever I would get down or I can't do this. You know, you're a kid, you want to make excuses why the grades aren't great, why you're not doing X, Y, and Z. And she would constantly say, no existe imposible. Like there's no such thing as impossible. And so you hear that enough and you start believing it. It's like now when I'm in the middle of a project or when I'm dealing with a problem and people are like, oh, it can't be done. It's like in my mind, it's like, no existe imposible. Like, don't you know that? Like everything is doable. And so, you know, I think immigrant parents are different. Their kids are different. You know, and I think the greatest thing that we can do for our kids is to encourage them to fail. You know, there's this phrase that I love so much. It's called fail forward, right? People are so afraid of failing because it makes you look bad. You feel like less than because everybody on Instagram is succeeding. And, you know, and so when I talk to my sons especially, it's like if you're not failing, you're not doing anything worth trying. And so you can't be afraid to fail. You can't be afraid to fall on your face and get back up. And I mean, you were in MMA. Like, people don't just become champions. How many fights do you lose? How many, you know, exhibitions? People don't see that. All people see is the pay-per-view. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I've always been transparent about my failures. I think I enjoy talking about my failures more than I do about my successes. And the reason is because everybody's talking about their successes. Nobody tells you, hey, here's where I lost. You know, here's where I made bad decisions. Here's where, you know, I hit the reset button and started from zero. You know, and so, yeah, I think fail forward is probably the most important thing you can teach your kids.
Well, can we? So for people that don't know Teo, he's one of my most successful friends, if not the most successful friend, not just financially and with your career, but just the way you have great balance. You have a lovely family. You know, so many people, they lose they don't have a good relationship with their wife or their kids because they're so focused on business, or they have a great relationship with their family, but they're always broke and struggling. And you seem to balance the two perfectly. And on top of that, you also do a lot of things for your community. And, you know, so that's why, you know, I know we're good friends, but I really mean it. You know, I look up to you in so many ways. You're a few years younger than me, which is funny, but you're my mentor in many ways because, you know, you had a family much younger and you've been down this road. So I'm going to look to you as my son gets older and hopefully, you know, more kids in the future for advice. But you went through that tough time with the lawsuit or the legal issues. Can we talk about that? So but before we started recording, I asked you, I said, is that, can we talk about anything? Is there anything off limits? And you said, no, I want to talk about that because of all the things you learned. And I think it's so refreshing, because in this day and age, especially with cancel culture, which I just hate, people pick something from 20 years ago and then try and get people fired from jobs and things like that. And it's just, I find that so depressing and demoralizing. And there's natural fighters like us, like we would fight against that. But there's a lot of people that just don't have the disposition to fight, and it kind of breaks them, and it just breaks my heart. So I love hearing how you overcame that, and the lessons you learned, and actually how it even happened. It's been a while since you told me.
Yeah, it's been a while, so I think I'm the byproduct of like a self-taught entrepreneur, and the pitfalls of being self-taught in anything is that you learn lessons the hard way, and so I can't sit there and say I had somebody that was really holding my hand through the process. And so you kind of see things that are happening in the industry by people that are more seasoned, and you just think this is business as usual, And so I was running an architectural firm at the time, and I was doing a project for a client. My client got caught up in, a bribery case. We had done the architectural plans on the project for this individual. We reflected some things on the plans that weren't there. And so that was something that we made a mistake in, and as the owner of the company, I had to, own up to that. And so, long story short, I get a knock on the door, and it's the FBI, and it's one of those things where when it first happened, I opened the door, I just honestly thought they were at the wrong house. It's like not the kind of thing that you ever think you're going to get pulled into, because it is so minor. Everybody's kind of doing it, and, and life goes on. And so, I got arrested. It was a shock for me personally. And, my wife was pregnant with our first son, part of a Christian community. And so that's something very heavy that you have to explain to people, that expect you to be, a good moral example to young people. And so you fail in all these areas. And that's really what I felt like. I felt like, hey, like I'm too smart to plead ignorance, and it's just, you want to be successful, and so you turn a blind eye and you dabble in these gray zones, and it's like, oh, nobody's getting hurt, people are actually getting helped, and it's fine. And you realize early on that, hey, it's not fine. It might not catch up to you today, but it's going to catch up to you tomorrow. And so, but it wasn't just, the arrest, it was the time when it happened. Because shortly after that, we have the real estate market that implodes. And so I'm dealing with this personal legal issue. The real estate market, is in disarray. So at that point, I was trying to nurture 3 companies. One of them was our development company, where we just had bought a couple of properties that we were converting into condominiums. Another one was an architecture company that I had started. So I'm not an architect by trade, but architecture is so important to the real estate development cycle. And sometimes architects are great at design, but they just lack the business sense of, running projects, updating clients, staying organized. And so I just saw a great business opportunity there. And then I had my construction company, that kind of got my foot in the door. So I'm doing these 3 things, and my dream at the time was to be in Crane's 40 Under 40. I know it sounds great, nerdy a little bit, but that was my dream. I was like, oh, one day I'm gonna, and so I'm this 26, 27-year-old kid, and I got these businesses that were doing well at the time, and they all implode within a period of like 3 to 6 months. My architecture business, the phone stops ringing. My clients are losing properties. My general contracting business implodes. Nobody's making payouts. Banks have stopped lending. And so I'm having my properties upside down. And so you get to a point where everything's going well, and then literally 3 to 6 months later, you lose everything. And, I had $40,000 left in my business account. And my house was probably 6 months, past due. So I'm starting to get the foreclosure notices. And I had a good client of mine who had offered me a job and kind of said, hey, come work for me. There's going to be a lot of opportunities, well-to-do guy, a great resource for me. And, and that's when I had to decide, like, am I going to stay an entrepreneur? Am I going to figure this out? Or am I going to take the nice, management job, make 6 figures, and just kind of put the dream on hold? And so I got 40 grand left. I'm just kind of driving around, you know, and just thinking, you know, it's like I don't want to, you know, show my wife, you know, that I'm down, because then she's going to get down. So I'm pretending everything's fine. And as I'm driving, there's all these buildings throughout the city. You see cranes. Construction had just frozen. All right. So it's kind of crazy that it's almost, 15, 16 years ago, right? And I see all these cranes, almost like this apocalyptic scene where nothing's happening. And I realized, you know, these buildings at some point are going to have to start getting finished. And so I just had this idea as I was driving that I was going to get into steel work. I've never done steel work before. And I'm like, you know what? There's going to be a ton of guys looking to do work. So I get into steel work, and, you know, it's probably the best decision I made. I mean, you fast forward 2 years later, like 2 years from the day, and I moved into the house that, you know, my wife and I would go, we would end up raising our kids in. And in 2 years, we were able to build the house cash and be mortgage free.
Wow.
You know, and so what that kind of taught me is, you know, that's what makes America great. You know, it's like you could lose everything, but as long as you don't lose that drive and that hope, as long as you don't lose the grind, you don't need decades. It's a misconception to get back on track. You know, capitalism rewards hard work. It rewards good service. It rewards fair prices. It rewards people that keep their word. And so really through just running a normal business, okay, in a climate that was very anti-construction, right? You remember those times. You know, I was able to, you know, kind of do the impossible. And so, you know, that was my bounce back, you know.
So I never knew that. So
Yeah.
what did you do in steel, and how did you, like, I love that. That's, I know you obviously, so I know that's your mindset. But for people that are listening, they're thinking, how the hell does he manage in 2 years to do so well in an industry he doesn't seem to know anything about?
So my wife and I, who, you know, my wife is the biggest blessing in my life. She's the best decision I ever made, and we laugh about this today. Yeah, you know,
likewise.
yeah, there we go.
Best decision we ever made.
So we laugh about this because you know, in my mindset, there was this disconnect in services. So you were either getting a union type company to do steel work, or you were getting the mom and pa with the pickup truck converted into a steel fabrication. But it was just this idea. I'm like, you know what, like maybe banks, maybe developers, maybe people that are taking these projects are going to take a chance on non-union labor because they're so upside down. It was just a hunch. And so I think what we're really blessed with today is the information age. You know, people would go to college because they didn't have access to the information that colleges were teaching. In essence, now with YouTube, with books, you can bring college to you. And so in a very limited amount of time, you can become highly educated on a topic that you desire to learn. And so my wife walks into the house. I got 40 grand left in the bank. I've made a decision that I'm going to take this 40 grand, reinvest it into a new business. I'm not taking the cushy job. I'm not paying my mortgage, and I'm going to figure something out. And so my wife walks into the house, you know, and I'm reading a book on welding, right? And she says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm reading a book on welding." She says, "Why are you reading a book on welding?" I said, "Well, I'm starting a steel fabrication business." She looks at me like, you know, she's getting the notice. She's like, "What's wrong with this guy? Like, my husband's lost his mind." Like, what? Like, you know all these things, and you're going to get into something that you don't. And she says, "But how are you going to start a steel fabrication business when you don't know how to weld?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's why I'm reading the book." And it was this like moment where both of our, like, there was complete clarity in both of our questions, but we were just in, like, to me, it's like, of course I don't know. That's why I'm reading the book. But if I read the book, I'm going to learn, you know? And so, I just reached out to a bunch of different clients. I would just cold call and say, "Hey, I'm in the steel fabrication business. If you need anything, let me know." And so one of my clients says, "Hey," because again, I had done good quality work up to that point. And I think people that knew me knew, hey, if he doesn't know, he's going to figure it out. He's going to find people that know. And so my goal wasn't to actually physically weld or fabricate, but I'm going to hire a welder. What do I ask him? How do I know if he's a good welder? That was the part of the education. So part of the education wasn't for you to, manually work in the business. It was more managerial. Okay. And what I learned really early on is that most of the guys that I had hired on my projects to do steel work didn't really know that much.
Wow.
Okay. And so one of the first things I picked up is when you have like a welding stick that guys used to weld. And one of the first things I read in this book is when you look at the welding stick, it's got a code. I'm like, okay. And the code basically tells you what kind of steel you're supposed to weld with that particular welding stick, right? And so if you're welding new metal to old metal, it's a specific code. If you're welding this thickness with that thickness, it's a specific code. If you're welding indoors or outdoors, so I'm thinking to myself, hey, if these guys were professional, right, they'd have like multiple welding sticks. But these guys would just walk around all day with like the same general purpose welding stick in their pouch. So I'm like, these guys, like I'm hiring professionals, but these guys are just like, like very mediocre, And so, so that's why it was important to me. I think especially in construction, it's your reputation is so important. Meaning, what kind of work do you provide? And so. And so I reached out to a couple of clients, and a guy called and says, "Yeah, I actually have an emergency. I got a steel job, And so, I'm thinking it's a gate. I don't know what to expect. And it was a job in Arlington Heights. It was these California walkways, and it was a tough job in the sense that these California walkways were the only means of egress to get into your apartment. So there was no back door. Okay, kind of very condo-ish. Well, these things were falling apart, and you had to demo and rebuild the same section in an 8-hour span.
Wow.
Because people would come home and people didn't want to relocate, and it was like these buildings. And so it wasn't just a normal steel job. You needed somebody that was going to make a commitment to say, hey, like I'm going to demo this section and rebuild it and finish it and plank it in 8 hours. So I got the job. I don't think because I had steel experience, but because people just kind of knew, okay, he's going to figure it out. He's a grinder. He's going to figure this out. And so, I traded my Lexus in for the ugliest pickup truck you had ever seen, and so I was, before the market imploded and before all my legal issues, my wife and I were doing well. I was driving a brand new Lexus, but I felt like a poser. And so I traded my car in and I bought a 1996 Ford F-150 turquoise green. It was like $1,500. It was the ugliest car, but it was a constant reminder when I got out of the house, like you're no longer here.
Yeah.
Okay, you can't pretend like you're here. This car is reflective of where you are. You got 40 grand left to your name. Your house is in foreclosure. This car represents where you're at, right? And so, I drive that car for 2 years and I traded in for my Range Rover, right? But that's how I think life should be, And so I land this job. It's like, I think it was like 130 grand. And I'm physically working on the job site with the guys because it was so important for logistical reasons. Long story short, I finished the job in like 2 months. And I profit about $60,000.
Wow.
And that's an insane amount of money.
Yeah.
When you're upside down on your mortgage, when you start a business with 40 grand, and that's when I realized, wait a minute, like it's a profitable business. It's a hard business. Steel work is not easy. And I took that 60 grand and got caught up on my mortgage, and it just motivated me to, continue seeking out those types of jobs. And again, it was a set period in time. And from that, we did a ton of balconies, steel balconies, and so that was just the kind of work that we got into.
So Teo, your mindset, it just reminds me of the stoicism mindset of you don't try and fight the situation you're in, you just deal with it as best you can. And that's what you did. Like so many people would have just been bitter. They started fighting with their wife and just being upset. You go from being up here to down there. And I've had a few ups and downs in life, and it's what you said is beautiful. Just it's accepting reality and then investing in yourself and then figuring out what other opportunities there are, and that just sums it up. It's really incredible. How did the legal, because you mentioned it before, where people would Google you and they would see this come up, and when you're telling me, it's such a joke. It reminds me of that absolutely ridiculous trial they're trying to get Trump on, where he got a loan and he paid it back, and now they're trying to say it's a crime because he said that the appraiser appraised the place too expensive. It's so ridiculous. You know what it's like in real estate. Everyone's trying to get things appraised as high as they can for loans. Like for me, that's another. It's a joke. Like same as you, it's a joke. But this thing followed you, and that must have been so frustrating.
It was very frustrating. Like I said, I looked at it like, hey, I was too smart for my own good, and it was my mistakes that got me into that situation. It's that simple. There's nobody to blame. But I can tell you that life is going to be hard. They're going to happen to you that are a result of your choices, right? It could be sickness. And so one thing is kind of guaranteed in life is that you're going to have to overcome adversity. Okay. And I think the most important thing is to just take responsibility for it. Okay. Recognize that there's certain things you can change and focus on the things that you can change. Like one of my favorite books to read is Romans, and that's why I think what you read is so important. Okay. And the thing that I love most in my life is my family. If I wasn't married, if I didn't have kids, I probably would be living in a one bedroom somewhere playing basketball 8 hours a day. Okay. And so my motivation, I got married when I was 24, was my family. I saw how my parents invested in me. And so if you have the right motivation, okay, it gives you, I don't want to say like the superpower, but like failure is not an option. When my wife was pregnant, one of the things that I was most afraid of, which I would never let on, right, was, man, what if I actually like have to go to jail for 6 months? Like, what's going to happen to my wife? What's going to happen to my kid? And so really when I started, that business, or when I, gave the keys back to the bank and hit the reset button, I kind of knew I had about a 2-year window. Okay. I had a 2-year window between case, appeal, etc. I talked to my attorney. So in my mind, I have 2 years to pay off a house. My goal was, hey, if something happens to me because I took my job and I just felt guilty, like I'm putting my family, my wife, who I love, in this situation, right? That I'm gonna work as hard as I can. And I'm telling you, I had scenarios. My dad didn't start a business, didn't do any of these things, and in 3 years, in being in the States, working just blue collar jobs, he had 3 jobs. He had bought and paid off a 3 flat.
Wow.
Okay, in 3 years. So people don't realize how much you can do if you really want to get yourself out of a situation, even financially. You could work a job that's 9 to 5, okay, sleep for a couple hours and work another job somewhere else. Okay, that's the immigrant mindset. And so for me, I was looking at the time, I was like, man, if I get a CDL license, how long is that going to take me? Because I can do a couple truck routes. I was thinking about all these different things. And so it all comes back to like, what are your responsibilities? And so for me, because my wife was pregnant, because I took my responsibility as a provider extremely seriously, I wasn't going to make excuses, and so like come hell or high water, I was going to figure something out in those 2 years. And so now you fast forward, the judge was extremely, I was a young kid, I was in my 20s, so it's like, I look back and it's like, man, how was I even in that situation? I was so young, and so the judge took pity on me. I would like to think that I've had a lot of positive things that I was doing in our community, so forth, and so all those things, come into play. And so, I got probation for like 2 years. I think it was a small fine of like a couple grand, and, and life was back to normal. But, when I walked up that courtroom, I realized that I had done in 2 years what people dream of doing in 30 years. Mm-hmm. Like when, paying off your house, paying off that 30-year mortgage, that's like the American dream. And I realized, man, because of the necessity of my situation, I did it in 2 years. And so since then, going back to like the grind, even the grind has different levels to it. Like there's people that are probably grinding right now, working a job and then working part-time somewhere else. That's a grind where you're working for someone else. That's very different from a grind where you're working for yourself, And so I think, what I hope people kind of get even out of this podcast is you have to grind and work hard, but not just putting in the time. Because there's people that do that. They'll work this 9 to 5 and then they'll get a couple shifts at Starbucks because, they have great health insurance, I think what makes America special is that it rewards small businesses. And so the advice I give to pretty much anybody that will listen is try to find a pathway to run a business. Why? Because corporations can't compete with small businesses. Why? Because small businesses at their core have absolutely no overhead. Corporations have large salaries. They have all these things. And so when it comes to blue collar businesses, the reason 80% are small businesses is because corporations can't compete. Like if I can't afford a $5 Starbucks, I can still afford a $2 coffee at the neighborhood coffee shop. You follow me? And so that's why there's no corporations in my business. Like there isn't a single corporation that does painting. You can't compete. If I call All Pro Painters and they got to pay their franchise fee, right? And All Pro Painters is going to charge me 10 grand to paint a house. But I got Juan, who's a wonderful painter. It's all he's been doing for 20 years. And he charges me 7 grand. All Pro can't possibly compete with Juan. Never. The reason they get the job is because people don't know about Juan. He's like my secret, your secret, right? And so I think that's what people don't realize is that small businesses in the service industry, which are so vast, create unlimited opportunity for people that are working a 9 to 5, but want a pathway to, being self-employed full time and just making more money. And so, like I said, for me, I didn't win the lottery. I didn't invent anything. I was a steel worker. I was doing something that thousands of people do, okay? But I did it at a high level, aggressively, and the payoff in 2 years was, having a house paid off.
God, that's incredible. It's I love talking to you because when we first met, we were also working with a third person who ended up the story screwed me over, and it was just this long thing where I was kind of stuck with him in all these properties, and I was worried about the other investors, and it was just this ongoing nightmare, which I'm still kind of dealing with the tail end of it. But I remember I called you when I was really down, and you gave me a really nice pep talk, and you basically said something similar along the lines of just the opportunity's there, the money's there, all the skills you've learned the last few years, you can use that. It's not like if you work for 5 years and all the money in the 5 years you end up getting screwed over or you lose it, however you lose it. In year 6, you're not at year 1, you're at year 5 plus whatever you've learned in the last few months. So like you can earn just as much as the last 5 years combined if you have the right mindset. And that's what I love about talking to you is so many people, we all have those self-imposed limitations, and some people, it's something about, maybe they see rich people as evil, so that's always going to prevent them from really becoming wealthy. Or we all have these narratives around money and finances and whether it's positive or negative. And what I why I love you so much, Teo, is because you are the American dream. Like you came here, and when I say that, it's not, you weren't handed anything, as you've just said. Like your dad was, you said he worked manual blue collar work. Right?
Oh yeah, he was a janitor. He came in. He worked his whole life for a property management company locally, Kagan Management. Great company. And I remember, Michael Daniels was the manager, and he would come by, and I was like, oh, one day I want to be like that, And so I think, you have to, again, it's inspiration. There's just certain things that I was blessed to have from my parents, from the people that I was surrounding myself with, That's why I'm not a big fan of and I think it was such a failed experiment, when we had subsidized housing that was all concentrated to one area, because you rob people of positive examples, And so if you take a person that is, disenfranchised, and you plant them in the middle of a normal neighborhood, they're going to realize that, hey, it's normal to have grass on the front lawn. It's normal to have barbecues. It's normal. But if you put that person, you surround them with other disenfranchised, people in poverty, they're going to start to accept that that's normal. And that's not normal, And so, my early childhood surrounded me with people that I wanted to be like. So my dad swore I'd never get into construction. My dad had, a good job in Romania, and a lot of these guys, a lot of immigrants, they might be a doctor in their former country, and they come here and they're an Uber driver, right?
So sad, yeah.
Right? And so, in our house, you had to go to school. You had that was non-negotiable. You had to get a degree, and my dad said, you're not going to work in construction. I want you to wear a suit and tie. And so, my undergrad was in computer programming. I'm a computer science major. So this is like the Y2K era, where you were making good money out of college, and I had a great job downtown. And I think I was 22, and my director had just gotten promoted. And she had been with the company for 25 years. And there was probably 100 managers that were all vying for that same promotion. And it was the saddest thing when you came into the office after the person got promoted, because for the one that got promoted, 99 didn't, right? And so I'm young and I'm sitting there, I'm like, man, is this going to be like my life? Like, am I going to be stuck in this corporate job with 5-6% increases, hoping that when I'm 45 years old, I get the directorship position? And now, meanwhile, one of my best friend's dad, Eli Venter, was this guy that was like driving Mercedes and AMGs and, dressed to the nines and spoke English as a second language. And he was in the real estate business, And it was like, I want to be like this guy, And so, but going back to what we said earlier about adversity, I got to a point when I was reinvesting in real estate, Lawrence, where I realized that because of my arrest, I was basically unlendable. Like, no bank is going to lend to me. They don't know me. I don't have a track record, right? Properties that you had were lost, And it forced me to either give up on my dream of being a developer, being, in real estate, or instead of coming up with 25% down, I was going to just have to save, make more money, save, and buy the properties cash. If you're out there and you're listening, the most important thing that you have to be able to do to be successful is save money. That's what people don't realize. You need money to make money. Everybody talks about getting investors, getting all this, and it is, it's so hard to bring investors in because investors want you to have a proven track record, right? And so most people just waste years that turn into decades of their lives trying to build something that's never really going to happen, And so I remember when I got into Pilsen, the reason I got into Pilsen is because it was one of the only neighborhoods that I could afford, And so I bought a property, $75,000 cash, because everything else in the city was $275,000, And so, that negative thing kind of forced me to get into a situation. The craziest thing, I don't know if I ever told you this, that I ever did. The craziest thing that I ever did, Lawrence, going back to like the grind, is I got a business loan. So, like you get these advertisements for business loans, right? Like, and it's like the interest rate is ridiculous. Like, you don't even want to calculate it. It's so bad, right? And so I found this property in Pilsen. It was $360,000 for 8 apartments. Oh. Dirt cheap, but I had no money. The money that I had already invested. I think I owned like 2 or 3 properties in Pilsen, right? And so I had no more money, but it's a phenomenal deal. No bank's gonna give me money. What am I gonna do? So I take out these 2 business loans, and they're the kind of loans that you got to pay back in weekly payments. So it's like a reverse waterfall. So you get a $360,000 loan. The payback is like $420,000. Okay, so you're thinking, I'm paying $60,000 in interest. I'm not buying the building for $360,000. I'm really buying it for $420,000 because there's interest. But if you actually calculate the interest, it's exponentially higher because you're not holding that $420,000 for 12 months.
Right.
They're gradually peeling it back. So like I've never went back to actually figure out like what was their interest rate, because I think I would lose my mind, right? So here's the crazy part. I think it ended up being like $8,000 a week. Wow. That they were going to pull out of my account. And again, I was making decent money, but I wasn't making profit $8,000 a week. Now I got to come up with $8,000 on top of whatever I was doing. So I did this simple math in my head. I was like, listen, if I can just do like one, roof repair job, one tuck pointing job, if I can just do like one extra thing per day and make $750 or make $1,000, right? By the end of the week, I should be able to come up with $8,000 as they pull this out. So I go on this insane grind for the next year, where if it rained, I would email everybody in my Rolodex. Do you have any roof leaks? Do you need any help? Any drywall repairs? If it was snowing, hey, do you need any plowing, right? I mean, every day it was like begging people to let me do the small, crappy job that nobody wanted, right? And so you fast forward, and in 12 months, that building was paid off cash.
Wow. From you hustling?
From me literally doing, and again, this is going back to like doing manual work, nothing's beneath me. Like nothing is beneath me. If you hire me to do a job and you got to move it in 3 days and somebody doesn't show up, like I'm going to roll up my sleeves, I'm going to physically work. And so I'm talking about like, I still have a picture in my phone. It's from 2014. And I mean, I don't even want to show it to you. It's so embarrassing, but like I have bags under my eyes. I'm on a roof in like Lakeview, this massive roof job that we got, and we finished this roof in like 3 days. All right, it was working from like 6 a.m. to midnight.
Wow.
It was just insane job that we did, and I keep that in there because it reminds me, like, hey, like this is where you came from. Like nothing can be beneath you, and so. Yeah, that building was paid off, not with investors, not with profits. It was literally me physically doing work that I hadn't been doing before that I need to finish in like a day. And so, you know, I would go on to sell that building for $1 million too.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and so, you know, I feel like, especially in real estate, unless you come from money, which I don't, unless you have a pool of wealthy friends, that I don't, I think the easiest pathway to success in real estate is saving money, getting your hands dirty, and being willing to put in the extra time after hours. So
I just love that. I remember when I had I think this was before I had a property manager. So I was managing a few of my buildings and it was snowing. It was, I don't know, 9 o'clock late at night. And one of my tenants called and said, hey, the snow people didn't come. And I was like, okay. And I just, without even thinking, I'm like, I'm going to drive to Home Depot. I'm going to get a shovel and I'll do it myself. And I'll sort it. And then as I was just getting my keys about to go in the car, I was like, oh, they just showed up. No worries. You know? So I was like, oh, and I was like, oh, good. I don't have to do it. And I remember thinking, I'm so glad that I haven't lost that thing where I think things are beneath me. And I think there's so much power in that, Teo. So many people, like you said, you have these reminders and you remember where you came from. It's so easy as we get more established and successful in life to kind of forget about the little things. And the problem with that is, I heard this really, really wealthy guy, I think probably a billionaire, talking about travel. And he said, if you always travel, you know, he's so wealthy. Everything is private. If he doesn't go private, it's first class. It's staying in the nicest resorts. He's like, if you always travel like that, your standards get so high, it becomes almost impossible to please. And there'll be like one little thing, like a bad meal, you're going to get irritated. So he says every now and again, he takes these trips where he goes in economy and he stays in a, kind of crappy hotel. And it reminds him of this life he lives is not normal. And he wants these reminders. And I think that's so important. And I love that. And you mentioned with we've had this conversation before, but I have this fear where we're both first generation immigrants. We both work really hard. I'm nowhere near as successful as you, but I'm hoping to get there. And we both want to give our kids everything. But I remember you told me a few years ago, you said, I've got to be careful because I want to do all these things for my boys and my daughter, but take them on trips and show them all these experiences. But I have to be careful that I don't spoil them. And I always think I think you might have told me this. There's so few second generation millionaires. Most millionaires in America are first generation because they kind of came from hardships and that's what gave them the drive. And the people that grew up in these gated communities with all these amenities, they don't tend to have that same motivation.
Yeah.
So do you worry about that with your kids?
That is probably my greatest worry, and that is that is the area that I spend the most time thinking about today. Okay, and the reason I say that is because I love my boys, I love my daughter, I love my family, and if I work hard, I think it says this in like Ecclesiastes, like, what if the person that comes after you is a fool and squanders everything you've done, right? Like that's like the fear, and and so the more time I've spent, my oldest son is 15 right now, Gavin's 13, Ethan's 15, and Gianna's 12, and the more time I've spent thinking about it and kind of treating it like a business class, right, or a research paper. And I've been very blessed to have been surrounded by a lot of people. And so part of the work that I do in our church, I was a youth pastor for a long time, and all that means is you deal with like young people, right? And so you kind of get to see how different families raise their kids, what works, what doesn't work, And so it's like an awesome. That's why I think, being involved and volunteering in a church, in a faith group that you're a part of, right, is so important because it's relationships, right? And so I'm not nearly as worried about it. I don't want to say that I have like a foolproof plan, but I feel really confident about the steps that I'm going to be taking with my children. So the first one, and I think a pitfall is that people bring their kids and they hire them into the business. Okay. And so my goal is not to do that, but it's literally to start a business with my son. Okay, why? Because, and I remember, I think there was, and again, now with Instagram, like every great thing that you've heard, somebody's probably seen on a reel somewhere, but there was this great story that I remember reading. It was about this well-to-do businessman, right? Wants to teach his kids some lessons. And so they're driving through the country, and brand new nice car, luxury car. And anyway, if you ever drove through like the country, you'll see, fresh produce, fresh eggs, so and so, right? And so this is in like some, dirt road in Romania somewhere. And this farmer has a stand and he's selling eggs. And so it's like a little rest stop. A couple people have stopped by. And so this boy's watching his dad in action, right? He's going to engage in commerce. And before them, there was a young, another lady there, and she is haggling on the price. The guy was selling a dozen eggs for like $5 or something. She says, "Oh, these eggs look terrible. I'm not going to give you 5. I'll buy 2 dozen for $8." So the old guy, is how he makes his living. He says, "Sure, give me the $8 and here's 24 eggs." And so the kid is excited. He's saying, "Man, my dad's a great businessman. If this lady got 2 dozen for $8, he's probably gonna get 2 dozen for $5, or who knows what." So the kid's kind of excited. And the dad goes up and looks at the eggs and says, "Oh, $5 is not. It's not nearly enough. These are the best looking eggs I've ever seen in my life. Like, are these organic?" He's like, "Yeah, they're organic. Are these pasture?" "Oh yeah." He says, "I'll buy all the eggs, but only if you I'll pay you double, but you got to sell me everything." And so the old man's just doubled his profit, cleared his whole inventory. There was a couple stacks of eggs, and he's ecstatic, right? Guy takes the eggs, puts them in his trunk, gets back in the car. Now the kid's bothered. He's like, "What's my dad doing? Like, he bought all the eggs and he paid double." He's like, he's a terrible businessman. Like, that lady got a great discount, And so, he asked his dad, "Dad, why did you overpay?" And he said, "We're blessed, right?" He said, "This old man makes his living. How much money do you think he made? $40, $50, right? That's his whole livelihood, I wanted to do something good today. I could have just gave him the money and told him to keep the eggs. Like, I just want to bless you, keep the eggs. But if I would have done that, I would have robbed him of his dignity." So what I wanted to do was to bless him, but to help him maintain his dignity. And so what a lot of parents do is they want to help their kids, but they don't think about the dignity that goes into that. No grown man wants to come in and be handed something. No grown person wants to come in, and just be given something. And especially I see it with my son now, his friends are like, "Oh, you're, daddy's boy, daddy's going to take care of you." And it bothers him. And he made these little statements as he was growing up, And so if I just bring him into the family business, I'm just handing it to him, Why not just say, "Hey, here's $100,000 of seed money. You and I are going to start a business and we're going to flip houses. And it's your business. Okay? And you're going to help me make money. I'm going to make money off of you," which I will because I'm the investor, but it's your business. Now when he flips a house and makes 50 grand, okay, that's money that he made. And so I think that's super important. It's to find out how to bring your kids into a family business, but to give them direct ownership. And I've seen it plenty times where, like, the guy's 55 years old and it's still dad's company.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
And it's just like, just give him if I die tomorrow, the business, like all mine, like it's going to them anyways. Why wait? And so I think that's one of the most important things is bring your kids into the business. Second thing, and I think you understand this with jiu-jitsu, is sports. I think sports is extremely important when it comes to business development. Okay? And because why? Because there's a physical grind that goes into just about every single business. Okay? Meaning, like, you have to work the long hours sometimes. You have to put in the time. You have to deal with disappointment. And so I do think that whether it's music, which I think music is an acceptable substitute for that, okay? But when your kids are young, they should be involved in competitive sports, or they should be, my daughter does ice skating, and it's 6 a.m. in the morning, and my wife and her are walking out the door at 6 a.m. on a school day because she has to be on the ice from 6 to 6:30, from 6 to 7. Wow. Right? And so if she's waking up at 5 o'clock to get ready for that, right, it's not going to be hard for her to get into the office at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. when she's older, right? And so I think parents, when they don't involve their kids, and again, you don't have to be wealthy. My first introduction to sports was in the public rec leagues. And so I think as a parent, sometimes we overstress school, where like grades are the most important thing. And it's like, no. It's like, I want my kid to have average grades, be an average athlete, but be an athlete, you know? And so I think if you take a couple of these things and you put them together, you know, you shouldn't be so afraid of your children coming in and squandering everything, you know? And so, but I think you have to be intentional about that, you know? So
one thing I love, I've read so much on parenting the last few years. You know, my son's just over 3, and I remember when I was a new dad, was never really around kids. I wasn't really around cousins or younger brothers, and I felt so clueless about it. And I was so eager to learn. And the overriding theme that I would say that keeps coming up is it's not what you're telling your kids. It's what they're always watching and what they see you doing. So it's impossible for your kids. You can give them material things, but it's impossible for them not to appreciate an incredible work ethic when they see you doing that day in and day out.
Yeah.
And I think I found that so inspiring, because like, how do you be the best dad? Well, you be the best dad by being the best you. And I'm like, oh, that's so inspiring. Yeah. I was so worried about, you know, all those jokes about like, oh, you let yourself go when you become a parent, like dad bod and all that stuff. And I was so worried. I felt like I was so motivated when I was single. And I was so worried that I would just lose it all when I became a parent. And now I just feel like I'm way more inspired. Like you said, if you didn't have your family, you might be living in a 1-bedroom, happy, playing basketball.
Oh yeah,
you
different life.
Yes, but it's and I'm so. You said something to me probably about a year ago. You said something about how you were very proud of me, because when I was doing all these things before I had a family, and now I've seen, you know, I'm hopefully many more kids in the future, but I've seen the joys of parenthood and family, and it's something that you couldn't. I think it's worth talking about, because so many there's this thing in the air now where it's almost like it's almost like culture is saying, oh, you know, don't have kids and you don't need kids to be happy. Of course, you don't need kids to be happy, but there's almost something very negative about the traditional family unit and the family structure. And I know it because I felt it. I always felt like kids would be this negative thing that would pull me away from my selfish things that I was trying to do. And what you don't realize is no one knows what they don't know. And before you have kids, you don't know those feelings you get, that the pure joy and happiness of the smallest things that I never would even realize is possible, I get from him. And I remember when I was at my lowest point, I was 35, and I just had my last MMA fight, and I'd been very foolish with my money. And I always assumed I'd go back on the trading floor where I made all my money when I was young, and I can keep making all this money. And the whole industry had gone. So then I had this, what I call an early midlife crisis. I had a living girlfriend at the time. We broke up, and I'm completely single. And I go, so I have no idea what I'm doing. I was incredibly wealthy in my late 20s, and now I'm pretty much broke again. And I had this wonderful ride with the fighting and traveling, you know, competing and everything. And I'm like, that's over now. And no girl. And I'm like, Jesus, this is a little rough. And I went for a walk. It was really late with my 2 dogs. And I was like, well, looking at my dogs, I was like, there's one reason to live. I love these guys, you know, I'll just hang out with my dogs. And it was enough. I always say they saved my life. But it was the reason I was so depressed is because I thought the best of my life was past. I was like, I'm never going to be in the kind of shape I was at that last fight. I'm never going to have the energy that I had at youth. Yes, I can make money again, but it's not going to be the same if I'm older as when you're young and you have money. It's a bit more fun. That was what I thought in my head, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And that's I'm so much happier now than I was.
Yeah. And I'm glad you're saying that. I think, you know, there's a great quote that I love in scripture. It says, you know, bad company corrupts good character, right? And so I always tell my friends, like, listen, if you're in a serious relationship and you're surrounded by guys that refer to your wife as the ball and chain, you know, you're going to prison, what are you doing? Like, get rid of those friendships. You know, I have 0 friends like that, you know, and so I do think that, you know, that we're in a really sad place as a society. And I think the reason it's so depressing is because it doesn't have to be like that. Like, people talk about mental health and all of these things. I look at, like, there's days when I come home and it's been a rough work day, right? Fail an inspection. This goes wrong. You know, you just have days where it feels like you struck out multiple times. And you come home and your family is there. And it's like your joy. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, what happened at school? And so I pity people who don't have that support group. You know, we use these words like support group. Like when we talk about mental health, everybody's quick to say, oh, to have a support group is great. But if you call that support group your wife, your family, your kids, now you're being traditional. And it's like, I just think people that have been on the sidelines, that have been very quiet for the last 40, 50 years, need to just start speaking up. I think that's why Jordan Peterson has had such an impact in our society, because he just started saying things that a lot of people were thinking, but nobody was really saying, you know? And so, you know, I do think that, you know, my greatest joy is my family. It's my wife. It's my kids. It's my motivation for making money. You know, and then even from a business perspective, because now, you know, now I'm thinking about my boys, right? There's jobs that I shouldn't be taking anymore. Bathroom remodels, this and that, because they're beneath me, right? And so I'm thinking to myself at times, like, why am I doing this particular task? Because it's taking 2 hours out of my time and it's beneath me. And the only reason I still do those things is because there's a certain segment of my business that I want to keep for my kids to run. Kind of like what we were talking about ownership. Like, I can't sit here and say, hey, Ethan, run this multi-unit brand new construction development, because he doesn't have the skill set, doesn't have the experience, puts too much pressure on him, can't take ownership of it, right? But if I keep the maintenance guys is a small division that we have where we literally just do handyman work. Right out of college, I could literally take the keys to that car, like, go wreck it, you know? And so, you know, and so my kids and me desiring to see them self-employed, desiring to see them entrepreneurial, is forcing me to keep certain segments of my business that I otherwise wouldn't be keeping.
Can I ask you one thing, Teo?
Yeah.
Because I think the same thing. I want Victor to be entrepreneurial too, but there's something that you touched on about the realization you had when you were at that corporate job that this sucks, and if I keep going, this will keep sucking. I had that. I didn't. I guess I was very lucky, because I was when I was trading, I left very quickly, I guess. But when I joined my trading company, I never actually wanted to start my career. I did an undergraduate degree, and then because I wanted to prolong working in the real world, I stayed and I did an MBA because I was having a good time at college. And I thought my undergraduate degree was kind of useless, so I was like, I need a business degree. And then when I graduated, the goal was, I knew I was a hard worker. I had confidence that whatever I didn't know what I was going to do, but I had confidence that I would work hard and be successful. So I wanted to, before I started my career, before I had a family, I wanted to just enjoy life. And my plan was 2 years in Australia or New Zealand, just traveling around, living on the beach, chasing girls. Like, that was in my head what I thought would be fun, you know? And then I went to my uncle, who I'm very close to. He was talking about me to someone, he's at a party or something, and he said, oh, you should have your nephew. He said, oh, my nephew just graduated, he's really smart. And it was a trading company in London. They were like, oh, you should talk to this company, they're hiring, they need people like your nephew. And so I went in the office and I saw these guys, and I thought, well, if I work, it was end of the school year. So if I work for a few months before Christmas, then I can go to Australia and I'll just have money in my pocket and it'll be more fun. And then as soon as I saw these guys in their, 25, 26, making hundreds of thousands of pounds, I'm like, if they can do it, I can do it. I had that mentality. And then I got at that 3 months ended up being a lot longer. I did end up taking a sabbatical. I didn't go to Australia, but I did so I had that mapped out. But my point is, I left that company and I set up my own trading group within 18 months. But working at a company, my life sucked. And it was long hours. I wasn't rewarded. I think I made $1 million my first year trading, and I got like a $50,000 bonus. And I remember my brother saying, oh, that's amazing, you just got 50 grand. I said, no, I actually made them probably a lot more than $1 million, but I was handicapped by my boss. I had to keep getting out of these positions. So I was like, even with handicaps, I made a company $1 million and I get 5% bonus. All the other traders in the pit were on like 60-40 splits. So I was like, oh, should have 600 grand, plus. So it's that realization. Whereas with your kids, if they start a business with you, it's almost like they haven't had those awful jobs. They might not appreciate it. Do you ever think about that?
I do, but again, I don't think them working for me is going to be a walk in the park. I'm one of the hardest guys to work with and to work for. Why? Because I don't slow down for you. I know my weaknesses, I know my strengths. I wish I was more gentle. I'm not. If I'm grinding, you're grinding. And so, ultimately, I do think that when they join the company business, that they'll have similar experiences to that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Again, if you grind, you flip a house, how much money are you going to make? 50 grand? That's not a lot, but it's going to require the same amount of, headache and stresses as a multi-unit.
Yes.
And so, I'm not too concerned about I guess, like, I'm happily married, right? I don't need to go through a divorce to know and to value a good marriage.
Yes.
And so I don't think that we should look to give people the negative experiences. That's not a positive. Like, there's certain things that I hope my kids never know how to experience. Like, I don't want my kids to ever be physically assaulted. I hope they never get robbed. I hope they never get mugged. If they get robbed and mugged, will they be able to relate to someone who's been robbed or mugged better? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean I want them to experience that. So 100%. Even in the professional sector, I want them to, like I said, there was painful things that I learned. There was mistakes that I've made, which directly contributed to my success, but that I hope they never experience, because you don't have to have those things. I had to have them because of the choices that I made. I wasn't properly mentored. I can go on and on why they happened, and so, and then secondly, I look back and that's the beauty about being self-employed. Even though there's hard days, even in the hard days, there's great things that come from being self-employed. So let me give you an example. If I have a terrible day, you know what I do? I stop, I get in my car, I go to Starbucks, just grab a coffee. That's it. I just sit there for 20 minutes because I'm self-employed. And so I think, like, people that are self-employed need to talk a lot more about the joys of being self-employed. Yes, it's hard. Yes, you're on the hook for this and for that, One of the most important things for Alice, so my wife graduated with her master's in teaching, okay? And so, and so the plan when Ethan was born is that, she's going to start teaching and he's going to go to daycare and so forth, And so, when the little guy was born, and daycare is expensive. Like, you don't realize how expensive daycare is until you start looking for daycares, and it's like, wait a minute. And then when you actually sit down and figure out, okay, how much is daycare? How much is the second car, the second insurance policy, lunch for being at work, gas? Like, she was going to make more money, but it wasn't going to be exponentially more, where it wasn't a great financial incentive, if that was a reason. And not only that, but, once Ethan was born, my wife's like, I think I just want to be a stay-at-home mom. That's great, except for the, like, giant pay cut that, like, I'm expecting she's gonna make 80 grand, and so being self-employed, because you make more money, it also allows you to enjoy other things. So I think it was Andrew Tate who popped up on my reel, and I'm gonna butcher this, but he said something. It was a quote that he was quoting, where it was like, this husband was talking to his wife, and he was saying something like, you don't have stress, but I have stress. You don't have peace because you have peace, but I'm fighting, or something like that. And it's like, but I have peace, and I have whatever it is that he was, because I have you, right? And so for me, going back to work, although there's negative things that come with work, I want my boys to realize that the negative things that they're going to be experiencing as, like, the husbands, right, are also going to result in the positive things that their families are going to be experiencing. So when my kids were small, I'll never forget this. I was getting ready to go to work, and kids around like 4 or 5, they start like becoming very deceptive at times, And so I made a rule. I was blessed to have a lot of clients that were Orthodox Jewish, right? And so what that means is that they typically just didn't work on Saturdays. All right, that's, they're keeping the Sabbath, no cell phone communications, time with the family, going to synagogue and so forth. And so I saw people that were very successful that didn't work on Saturday. Now, in our business, Saturday is the catch-up day. Yeah, that's when everybody's catching up on, right? And here you have a guy that I look up to who's not working Saturday. When Ethan was born, I made a rule that I wouldn't work Saturdays. It forced me to become a better manager, to be more efficient in the 5 days that I had, right? So, so I'm saying that to say that I was always involved. Like, Sunday was church, Saturday was family day, go to the park, all these things. So like on a normal like weekday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm getting ready to go to work, and he starts crying. He's like, I'm like, what's wrong, buddy? He's like, I don't want you to go to work. I want you to play with me. And it's like, oh, I'm like, okay. I said, but I got to go to work. He says, you love work more than you love me. Like, right? But I'm like, I'm not fazed. I already have an answer, right? I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, no problem. All right, you want me to stay with you? So I started taking my shoes off. I said, I'm going to stay with you. Okay? And I called my wife and I said, hey, Alice, and I said, can you call the stranger for the babysitting tomorrow? And he's kind of like looking around like, what's happening? I said, what stranger? I said, well, since Tati's staying, I say Danny Rubin, I said, since I'm staying home from work, I'm not working, I can't make money. And so mommy's going to have to go to work tomorrow with Tati to make up for the money that I didn't make. But there's going to be a stranger and he's going to come and watch you. He looks and says, you know what, Tati? It's better if you go to work today, right? And it's like, listen, the reason mommy gets to stay home is because Tati doesn't. Like he was early on in age, and I constantly do that. I reinforce certain things. I take my daughter on date nights, since she was like 4 years old, all right? And, I'm like, hey, and we talk about like the future. I'm like, are you going to marry a loser? He's like, I'm not going to marry a loser, I'm like, is he going to have a job? Yes, he's going to have a job. Is he going to be working a 9 to 5? No, he's self-employed. And so I think you have to like get into the subliminal messaging, and so part of what my kids know is this. It's like Tati works hard so you can have the life that you have. And so I think if they understand that hard work produces positive things in the family, they're not going to treat those negative things, those bad days, as bad days. Like I'm having a rough day, but that's why my wife has been a stay-at-home mom. We have 3 kids. I mean, that's been my greatest success, is being able to financially support my family on a single income. Why? Because during those years, especially those very impressionable years, it made me feel so good to know, hey, my kids are getting the most number of hugs, the most kisses. My wife was a great mother. I mean, and again, she's got a master's in teaching. She's super qualified, right? And so, like that's just something that daycare won't give you. It's not, and there's a set period in time, like now they're in high school and, now we have more flexibility in our schedule. But when they were very young, I'm so proud of the fact that, hey, they went to see grandma and grandpa. And so like the ecosystem that our family was raised in was healthy, with grandparents and aunts and cousins and play dates during the day when Tati was at work. And so I think going back to what we were talking about, as far as like the motivation, like money is a necessary evil. Jesus is like this hippie that often gets quoted by people, right? And, but 75% roughly of his parables have to do with money. Here's a guy who's never ran a business. Jesus says money is the root of all evil, right? And yet 75% of his parables have to do with money. And it's kind of like, why? Like you wouldn't expect, this religious guru to talk about these things that we all admit one day when we die we leave behind. And I think the reason why Jesus talks so much about in parables about money is business and money is easy to figure out. It's easy to figure out. It's not difficult. And so when we talk about like personal relationships, 90% of divorced couples. Okay, so if like we talk about how important family is and we work for our families, like the divorce rate's at 50%, which is so crazy and it's so sad, right? And psychologists have talked about like the impact on kids that a divorce has. It's like 2 of the most traumatizing things that a child will go through is the death of a parent and a divorce. So if you want to destroy your family, leave his mom. Like literally, that's what the statistics say, right? And so, but now if you come back and you say, well, what's the reason? It's not adultery. He's beating on her, she's beating on him, people cheating left and right. No, 90% of divorced couples will say that the number one primary factor in their marriage not working out, right? These people that once loved each other, all of a sudden they don't love each other, right? Same people, is because of financial hardships. Okay, and so I think in the ecosystem, if you can have a small business, make more money, and create an environment for your family, which money allows you to do that. Statistically, I think you will be happier. And we look at money like we said, rich people are evil. It's like, man, rich people get to keep their kids at home. Rich people get, like, since when is this a negative thing?
Yeah. The culture's made it a negative thing.
Yeah. And so
you said something very interesting though. You said, you were able to support the family on a one parent income. And that's become, so much harder with ever since Nixon came off the gold standard and the erosion of the purchasing power of the dollar the last 2 generations. It's become so much harder. You see those pictures of the dad in the 50s, and he'd have a nice car and a middle class house on a one income family. And now so many people, it's both parents working, some of them multiple jobs, they're struggling. So I just think it's so good to have the right approach to money, and early. So the earlier you can just have a good relationship, and the way you describe it is you're using money to buy back your time to really focus on the family. And I've heard people talk about money as an amplifier. So if you're broke and you're miserable, and I give you a couple of $1 million, you're just going to be a miserable millionaire. And if you're a happy guy who's broke and I give you money, you're probably going to be a happy rich guy. It really does seem to be an amplifier. But I look at it like it buys back the freedom to it. It's not. So many people have that misconception that if I'm really wealthy, I'll have no stress and I can just sit on a beach and do nothing. But that no one is going to be happy doing that more than a few weeks. And you mentioned, I love that word you used earlier, dignity. The dignity you get from working. I always joke to myself, intellectually, if I'd really spent the time, because I heard about Bitcoin when it was nothing, and I keep hearing it, and I never took the time to research it. And I always think if I had, because philosophically I really love the idea of this currency outside the system, this agreed form of wealth, and it's done so well. And if I just put a couple of thousand in Bitcoin 15 years ago, and I was now a Bitcoin multimillionaire, I would have missed out on all the growth that I had rebuilding myself. And my son wouldn't see me going to work and just juggling all these different balls in the air to try and be the best self. So it's like the goal should not be a bunch of money and nothing else. The goal should be having dignity and doing things that inspire you. And that's one of the reasons that I find you so inspiring, is because you are so successful, but you keep that work ethic. And I know part of it is you do love, you're such a, what I call I don't know if you're born or made, but you're such an entrepreneur. I always say you're my number one entrepreneurial mentor, because you're always doing so many different things. And when we met, you were one of the earlier investors in Pilsen. I'm so proud. We were setting sales comps and rental comps in Pilsen, from the beginning.
Good old days.
The good old. but it's. I remember back then we were sitting in a coffee shop. This must have been 7-8 years ago, and you showed me on a spreadsheet. You had a couple of buildings at the time, and you were showing me, if I keep going on this trajectory, every year they're making this much rent, and I'm going to reinvest and do more projects and just grow it exponentially. And that always stuck with me, Teo, because so many people have and you mentioned earlier that 2-year period where you paid off a building cash because you worked so hard. That's incredible. But most people always overestimate what they can do in a short period and underestimate what they can do in a long period. If it's like we're talking about skills stacked on top of each other, I always think the same with years. If you stack good years on top of each other, it's almost exponential what you can achieve. And you've always had such a great long-term mindset. Can we talk a little bit, just because it's such a big part of how I know you, on that, how you realized that business model with real estate and multi-units, how you realized it was such a profitable business, and talk a little bit about how you do so well with real estate.
Yeah, so going back to the 2000s, I started this architecture company, and I have different clients. And one of the things that was evident, or two of the things that were evident during the 08-09 real estate crash, which have completely shaped my investment philosophy that I got, were this. Number one, the guys that held multi-unit rentals made a killing during the downturn. Didn't matter what ethnicity you were, how sophisticated an investor you were, if you were in condos, if you were in commercial, if you were flipping single-family homes, and the real estate crash came, you got wiped out. Okay, so at that point you realize that the guys who aren't getting wiped out are the guys who have the multi-unit rentals. And so, although I swore I would never get back into real estate, when I did get back into real estate, I realized I want to be in the multi-unit rental game. Why? Because those are the guys who didn't get wiped out.
And
Okay.
they didn't get wiped out because when the market's really bad and people can't afford to buy, they have to rent. Is that
They
right?
actually were making more money. And so those monthly checks were coming in. You typically have more stable loans, 5, 7, 10-year loans, construction loans that people are using for condominiums, for single family homes, for new construction are typically 12 to 18 months. So if there's a crisis and your loan matures, you don't have 4 or 5 years to get on track. Okay, and so during the '08 crash, again, these are things that I was completely oblivious to, okay? Because again, I just never had mentorship in that regard. I was signing notes that I had no idea what I was signing. I mean, those loan docs are like, gazillion number of pages. And so I realized I didn't know why. Now I know why, and if we had, a 10-part series, we can get into that. But what I knew after the '08 crash is guys that held multi-unit rentals did well and ended up doing better. And so multi-unit is where I wanted to be. The second thing that I learned is most guys that got into real estate were doing something beforehand. So for example, you had a successful GC that was, starting to flip houses on the side, and he was making so much money flipping houses that he gave up the GC business because number-wise it didn't make sense. If my GC business is generating $250,000 of profit a year, okay, but I'm flipping a single house and I'm making that much, it's actually holding me back. And so you had guys that were lawyers, accountants, doctors, general contractors, architects that got into real estate development and just became full-time real estate developers. Well, when the market crashed, there was nothing else for them to fall back into. And in essence, what they were doing is they were double dipping. Instead of using their investment profits to reinvest, they were living off of their investment profits. And so it's almost like you're saving up and you're putting money into an IRA, but you have a debit card linked to your IRA account. Like, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so that's why for me, I always said, hey, I never want to be a full-time developer. That's too risky. And so the reason my real estate portfolio grew the way that it grew, in part, was because I generally didn't take money out of my real. If you and I sold a property, okay, for a profit, I sold a 3-flat. What would I do? I would take the profit and buy 2 3-flats.
Yeah, exactly.
That was it. And so I think that's the key to real estate investing, is that you have to just, and it goes back to compounded interest, Like, I wasn't a numbers guy, and I remember this one guy was talking about the power of compounded interest, right? You take $5,000. Everybody in America has access to $5,000. You can borrow it. You can get $5,000. You invest at a 15% return in the S&P, right? And I think it's like 32 years. That $5,000 turns into $1.3 million. So by that simple formula, if you understand time and compounded interest, with very little, everybody in America should have a nest egg for retirement, but they don't. And so like you were saying, I think people just want the material benefit of their investments. They want to flip a house to buy a new car, flip a house to buy a bigger house, show off. That wasn't my intent, And so when I got into real estate, I knew that I wanted to get into multi-unit. And I think it was, I think you would end up selling 2104 West 18th. That was one that you ended up selling. But I remember that was the first property that I finished. And I didn't have any mortgage on it. And I think I rented for like $6,000. And I remember that when I took it out to market to sell, I think we had it on the market for like $699 or something like that before you and I had talked about it. And I got a full price offer like in 24 hours. I'm like, something's wrong here. Like, why, And so because I think that's the most frustrating thing to a broker. Like, you do your job, but the guy's like, something's wrong. Like,
it's too good.
Yeah, it's too good. You should have gotten me an offer for $650. And that was lit. I feel guilty because of the poor guy, And I ended up not selling it. And it was the biggest blessing for me to not sell that. Why? Because a couple of years later, right, I'd end up selling it for $100,000 more. So it was more profitable. But real estate the end game is appreciation. Okay, and so aside from like a couple $100 that you make on a property, what people don't realize is the intangible wealth that real estate brings you. So for example, you own real estate now, you have depreciation. So if you're working a 9 to 5, you're an accountant, you're making $120,000 a year, you're getting taxed 26%, whatever it is, but you own a 3-flat. Now that 3-flat has depreciation, your tax basis goes down. That money that you would have just sent to Uncle Sam now gets recycled back into your investment portfolio. Let's say you're making, a 5-6% cap rate. You're making a profit, right? People get their check at the end of the month and they're like, oh, it's only $600. I invested all this money, but I'm only getting a check for $700, for $1,000. What they don't realize is out of that monthly mortgage payment, there's principal. So I remember one time, as I was looking at my properties, that I had about, I think it was like $6,000 or $7,000 of monthly mortgage payments were going to principal. And so when I was down, I'd be like, hey, don't be down. You got $6,000 richer this month. Yeah. And it's statistically true. Even though I wasn't feeling it, my bank account was staying the same. From a numbers perspective, I was becoming wealthier every single month, And so I think that's the part that I'm I guess, most depressed about when I talk with entrepreneurs or young people, is because they don't realize how easy and how beneficial and how impactful that first owner-occupied property purchase is to the stability and the financial success of your family. Every young guy that I talk to, I'm like, you got to call Lawrence and you got to get into a 4-flat or a 3-flat. Why? Because that 5% down will go further than any other stock purchase that you make. Why? Because it's guaranteed. Your mortgage rate doesn't change for 30 years. You're going to have appreciation. If you do nothing else right in life, in 25 years and 30 years, when it's paid off, that's your nest egg. It's almost like again, guaranteed way to become a millionaire when you look to retire. And so I'm very passionate about multi-units.
No, that was a really beautiful explanation. And I remember thinking exactly the same thing too. When I was going through tough times, I had a couple of properties and I was thinking, man, all I've got to do is break even, and it's thousands of dollars every month I'm paying down principal, so my net worth is increasing. And that's, during the bad times. During the good times, you don't even think about it, and the net worth just keeps increasing. Yeah. It's like you have to have some way of doing it where it's automated. So some people, they have now where you can do a certain amount, where you buy a bit of the S&P stocks, every month from your paycheck, or you just, however you do it, you have to make it automated, because it's too easy to be like, oh, this month I want to buy this, and I'll save next month. And if it's not automated, life gets in the way, and then months go by and you realize you're not getting anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Too, you said one thing about college, and I think it's so interesting. So your parents were very big on, you have to go to college. And my parents, were the same. They would have been devastated if I hadn't gone. Whereas now we've seen college has been less about teaching people how to think and more about them, being indoctrinated in these certain ideas. And this recent Harvard case was just so depressing for me, because it was like the 100-year reputation of Harvard's been soiled for a lot of people, myself included. How do you feel about college, and what advice are you going to give your boys, because they're coming up to college age?
It's twofold. So number one, if you're going to go to school, I think you ought to come out of college with a very, very, very specific license or degree in something. I think the English literature, the business and management degrees, I think those are bachelors of science. I think those very general degrees are worthless.
Yes.
When I was younger, I couldn't wait to get my degree. As I get older, show me what you can do. Let me know what experience you have. The piece of paper means nothing to me, And so if you're going to go to school, have a specific trade or something very specific that they're teaching you. Be a doctor, be a lawyer, be a pharmacist, be a structural engineer, be an architect, be an electrical engineer. Have something that requires a state license that people, because I think those are valuable, I was meeting a young man that I'm mentoring, and he says, I want to get into real estate. I'm in accounting. Should I leave? And it's like, no, because accounting is a backbone of any business. So get your accounting degree, okay? Get your law degree, and so forth. And so I think if you're going to go to college, you're going to take that route, invest in something very, very specific. Me personally, I'm like you, I never thought that I would even utter the words, I don't know if my kids are going to college. That's not to say that I don't value education, but, I would much rather my son, for example, take a 9-month trade school in carpentry with the union, and from that jump into something else where you actually understand the trades that you're a part of. Okay, why? Because real estate is about building things. Okay, even in architecture, it's not, the programs aren't the same. And I remember one of the architects that we hired, we joke around because when he was in school, he didn't know how to draft on a computer because he would manually do the, blueprints. Yeah. I mean, actual hand drafting. He was one of the best architects I ever met. The guy knew everything about structure. Now, even the architectural programs, they're just different. You can't call your, fresh out of college architect and ask him a question about structural the way you could with the old timers. And so, and not just that, but it's also the cost. I mean, again, I'm a numbers guy. Do I take $200,000 and pump it into an Ivy League school, or do I take $200,000 and use it as seed money for a real estate venture? And so, again, I think this is where I want to give my kids, again, I can just give them advice, but it's going to be their decision. But I'm definitely not as pro college as I used to be. I think, especially with all the we briefly talked about it, I think the ideology that's being pushed inside of colleges right now is just too far left. And so I'm sending my kids to school to learn something specific in a trade, educate them when it comes to business and so forth. It's like, people were big on, get the Bible out of college. Okay, no problem. It's like, I don't want my kids to go to school to learn religion. Okay, that's what churches are for. That's what synagogues are for. And so you have your faith system, that's where they go. But I do feel like there's a left-leaning ideology, which is not a religion. It's not an organized religion, but it is a religion. Yeah. And so it's like, listen, I'm sending my kid, make him a great accountant, make him a doctor, make him a lawyer, make him a structural engineer, a civil engineer. And I feel like, a lot of colleges have drifted so far away from that it's just not as beneficial.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I'm so glad you said that about not having your son join your business, but you give him something where he's in charge of it and you're an investor and he can do his own thing so he can get the lessons. Because I feel like I had that thought, but I never really verbalized it. And just listening to you talk about it, it seems like such a great idea. And it's a wonderful way that you can keep being, he can be more present in your life and you can keep being a mentor to him. But he's still going to get the lessons he would. Like you said, you don't need to get mugged to know that being mugged sucks. You don't need to, he doesn't have to spend 5 years in a job he hates to know that sucks, right? You can still give him lessons. Teo, I want to be respectful of your time because I would talk to you for 5 hours. I'm going to bug you in a bit for part 2, but I think it's, every time I talk to you, I always leave with inspiration, and you're such an example of the man I want to be, Teo. You keep, no matter how successful you are, you just keep this youthful optimism and enthusiasm, and you have that crazy drive. And I wanted to share this with you. I've shared with you a few times, and you've given me some pep talks, and I get a little bit frustrated because I feel like where I am in life and all the money I've made, I should have more to show for it. I've had some ups and downs, and I heard someone say, if you analyze a lot of these incredibly historic, famous figures that we know of that have had great inventions or they become incredibly famous for something, a lot of time, if you look at the arc of their life, the peak of the success and fame and prestige and everything, from then until the end of their life was kind of this miserable decline because they got so much so quickly, and then it was like this kind of slow degrade into old age. And I remember thinking that for a long time, that was my problem. Is I had my 20s, I had so much financial success and prestige, and I was this young entrepreneur, and I was traveling the world with young women and doing all this stuff, fighting and all this stuff. And then when I was rebuilding in my 30s, it was like, man, I was up here, and I was still doing okay, but it wasn't quite the same. And so that's given me so much solace now. Is I'm so glad that I'm not where I want to be, because I know in my mind's eye where I want to be in a decade, and I have confidence I'm going to get there. But the fact that I'm not there today, the fact that I can look forward to it and I can kind of grow into it, I think is going to give me so much happiness. And so I look at you, and you're so, like, if I was talking to you, even when you pulled up that spreadsheet with those properties, you were doing very well then, right? You had all these assets, you had all this, your net worth was high. But yet you're so much more successful now, and you're doing so much more. I don't know if you were mentoring as much then, but you're just doing so much more. And it's not just about like your wealth, for instance. It's about like now you have the time to do other things like mentoring young people. So you've already got 3 kids you're mentoring, but you take the time to mentor dozens and dozens of other kids. So I find that so inspiring. Like when you take a step back and you look, you see these arcs of life. And I feel like you and I, one thing I never want to be is I never want to have a boring arc of life. And I feel like you and I have definitely not had that. We've had so many different things we've done. And I find it so inspiring, brother.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's, going back to goal setting, you know what I realized early on? And my wife would say this to me all the time. She'd say, you suffer from depression. And it would bother me. So I'm a happy guy. I'm not depressed, but she knows me best. And, and she would see my, change in attitude. And I realized something. When you have big goals in life, you're going to deal with big disappointments. And if you're not careful, it's so easy to label that like depression and things like that. And when I realized that, I wasn't depressed. I was just disappointed because things weren't going the way that I had according to my spreadsheet. And so that's why, going back to the grind, I think what's very important for people that are very motivated is to dream big and to have multiple goals. And the reason I say that is if you just have one specific goal that you're working towards, one property, one financial goal, when that goal hits a snag in the road, and that's the only thing you have going on, you're going to feel like the biggest failure. And so one of the things that I love about being busy is if I have 4 or 5 things in the air and this one falls through the floor, I got other things keeping me preoccupied and going well. So like when you're trading stocks, if you put all your money into one stock and it dips, then you sit there and, do I even know what I'm doing? Am I a good financial analyst, right? But if you have a portfolio of 20, 30 stocks and one does bad, you realize, okay, something happened here. You can analyze it, but you take solace in other stocks doing well, right? And so I think with entrepreneurs, they think that it's safer to have one goal that you're aiming towards, one business, one idea, one property. And I actually find it more dangerous. I think it's better to, and people think it's more of a risk taker. I'm not a risk taker at all. I'm very aggressive, but I'm not a risk taker. And most people think that they're the same thing. Okay? They assume that if you're very aggressive in what you do, that you must be taking risks. And it's like, no, if you tell me, hey, there's a secret formula in this cup, and if you sell this cup, you make $100, and your chance of selling a cup of coffee for $100 is 0.1%, right? But everybody needs a bottle of water, and if you sell this bottle of water, you make $1. I'll take this. And try to figure out, how do I sell 1 million of these? Yes. And I feel like a lot of people want like the breakthrough, and that doesn't happen. And so like right now where you are in life, it's like there's gonna be like this goes well, this goes well, this doesn't go well, this goes well, and so you take solace in that. And so I realize I'm not depressed. I just have a lot of dreams, and sometimes it's like this. Properties. I had a property that we purchased, and I ended up losing about $100,000 because it was in demo court, and I ended up having to rebuild a lot more than I rebuilt. And I'm thinking to myself, man, if that was the only property that I was developing, I would never want to get back into real estate. So yeah, I think that's kind of the secret that I'm kind of getting is like do multiple things, throw multiple balls up in the air, push them consistently up to make progress, and if you do, you'll have some base hits, some doubles, some home runs.
I love that. That's beautiful advice. Teo, it's always a pleasure, brother. Thank you.
Brother.
Always appreciate you.
Same here.